myself am strange and unusual.
Cast a circle, spark some incense, and grab a cup of tea, because it's time for the Cousins Coven Podcast. I'm here with my cousin, and we're here to talk all things witchy, paranormal, cryptid, aliens, and beyond. My name is Sharon, a self-proclaimed witch and seeker of the truth.
And I'm Wendy. I'm armed with a wealth of experiences and inspired by anything off the cuff. Today, we're diving into ancient aliens, but first, it's time for Cauldron Topics,
which is where we have actually printed out all of these different witchy-related topics, and we're going to put them in a cauldron and randomly draw from them and explain our thoughts and opinions on them. Today, we did want to start with a basic cauldron topic opener of why we got into witchcraft. So when I was growing up, I felt like I was really nerdy, spent a lot of time alone, and kind of obsessed with like escapism. And I was always drawn to reading and watching movies, and I would love stories about like with women in power, whether it be like X-Men and Storm's like weather abilities or Sailor Moon. Like I just always wanted to have like these powers. And I think it was when I watched The Craft in my 20s that like I just got super pumped after watching it, and I was like, I want this, I'm gonna do this. And I went to like my closest occult shop that I could find and realized I couldn't afford anything in there. So I went to like my used bookstore and I started just like picking up books from there and reading about it. And that's pretty much how I got into magic, just being like nerdy and studying it and learning from there.
Absolutely love that. That is so cute.
Yeah, right. I'm so nerdy that a movie could really reflect so heavily on me that I would go dive into Wicca. But the first book I bought was actually To Ride a Silver Broomstick by Silver Ravenwolf, I think is her name. She has like a little witch pen name. And I actually ended up hating it. I didn't think it like explained the religion at all. It was just really surface level stuff about like love spells and things like that. But luckily that didn't discourage me. I ended up finding this book called Wicca, A Guide for the Solitary Practitioner by Scott Cunningham. I'm not sure if you've ever read any of his stuff before, but it is so perfect the way he would explain like the god and the goddess, like being represented with the sun and the moon, and just how important nature is with witchcraft. And he would explain like the tools, how to have an altar, how to cast a circle, and how to even just have magic and things like that.
That is so cool. Well, my experience is completely different because I don't feel like I chose witchcraft. It chose me. So I pretty much have my whole life, whether you call it a spell or praying or whatever you want to call it, if I need something or if I want to do something, I just say it on my mind and then it sort of happens. So for me, that's my witchcraft. And yes, I'm totally obsessed with the shows that you are. I love The Craft, but I also love Practical Magic, and that is probably my favorite movie of all time.
Definitely.
So, I love the fact Witch Sisters. That is so amazing to me. So I always wanted to be like that. I was like, I want to have a witch sister.
I was
which
so
I kind of do. So that's kind of, for me, I didn't quite study the same way that you do. I have read a little bit up on it, but for me, it's just a way of life. And it's totally different than probably anybody else's experience.
It's true. And I think that witchcraft for every witch is super different. Like if you ask 10 witches a question on one subject, we're all going to have 10 different answers. And that's the thing that's so cool about magic, is that we all can have our own lens on a situation and own perspective and way of doing it. I really like that it's open.
Yes. Yeah, it is. And a little bit more accepting than some things are. So there's room for error.
Yeah. And it is funny because you are, I think it sounds like more of a natural witch where you have these abilities and there's things you've grown up doing and seeing, and where I was like searching for it by reading it and looking for it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna pull something from the cauldron.
Maybe.
See what we have here. Meditation.
That's a good one, honestly.
That is a really good one. So meditation's like a really important part of life, I feel like.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, spending that time with silence, I shouldn't say complete silence, because for me in meditation, I have to use music and headphones to kind of relax, but it's all vibrational tones. But that time to kind of let go. You know what I mean? Let go of everything that you may be harboring inside of yourself that you need to let go of.
Yeah, I think it's so important for anyone, witchcraft or not, just to like quiet your mind. And it's amazing how much clarity you can have after a meditation session, just of like focusing on even nothing sometimes.
Right, right. And it's really good for your body. It's very therapeutic. You know, meditation, people have been doing it for centuries. I even read that Jesus meditated quite often. And so for me, I'm like, okay, everybody's done meditation at some point and everybody should.
Definitely. And I'm the same as you. Like, I don't do that well if it's just completely silent. I'll start like wandering. Music helps kind of transport me and keep me focused.
Right. Especially if your mind is noisy. Like I suffer from noisy minds. So it's constantly noisy in there. I've always got all of these thoughts, or I may be hearing other people's thoughts, or whatever I may be experiencing at that moment. And so for me, meditation is a way that I can be myself and let go of all the stress.
Exactly. I think that yoga is something too that kind of is almost meditative, like before a practice or after a practice. A lot of teachers will have you be quiet and soak in the work, or just do like chanting and mantras. But anything that you find like meditative, everyone's going to have something different, whether it just be like a walk in the woods. I think there's different ways to meditate. Should we get another topic?
I'm thinking so. I was just going to ask that. Okay, let's see what we have in here. There's so many in here. I'm like, I love this. Okay, so this one's the ethics of money spells.
Ah, okay. I do like this. I think this is another one that every witch will have a very different opinion.
Sure.
I personally feel a little weird about doing money spells, and I've had money spells backfire on myself in the past. So it's something I get nervous about doing. I do feel like it's okay to ask for like prosperity and to have enough to get you by and to help you. But I think you got to be careful what you ask for. Like, years ago, it was probably one of my first money spells. I did a spell, and I don't remember, I think it was like a jar spell of some sort I found in a book. And I ended up losing my vehicle at the time, and that helped financially because I didn't have that car payment or that insurance payment, and it was working, but not the way I wanted or expected. So I was carless for like 3 years, but I had more money.
Yeah, that kind of makes me wonder how the spell was written. You know, if you don't put it out there exactly the way that it should be, then you might not get back what you think.
Yeah, I think that wording and intention is very important, and you never know how a spell's going to work out unless you probably put in a bunch of contingency plans.
Right. For me, I have not, well, I shouldn't say I haven't done a money spell. I know that I've done 2. Both times it was for, like, we were expecting a large sum of money, and I just asked for it to be expedited. So, I mean, I already knew that it was coming, and it's not like it had anything to do with death or anything like that. It was just, I think one time it was for, we were expecting like something from work. It was a bonus. That's what it was. We knew that we were going to get a bonus, but we didn't know when we were going to get it. And so I did I wanted it to come quicker than I thought that it was going to come. Yeah. And it worked. You know, it came. I wasn't asking for more. I wasn't asking for anything. I just wanted it to come faster. And it was the same thing. We were expecting a large sum of money from a settlement, and I did the same thing. I was like, I would like it to get here quicker. So, and
that worked well. No backfiring of any kind.
No backfiring of any kind.
That's good.
Yeah. So, I mean, I wouldn't go as far as to say that I would be like, oh yeah, I want to get this, you know, I want $10 million and I want it to come now. Because I don't think that kind of personal gain would be beneficial. There would probably be some repercussions, like you may lose something in the process.
Right. Yeah. There's got to be some sort of a cost, I feel like. And
right. A lot of give and take.
So I feel like there are people out there who will even pay for people to do spells for them. And
right.
That's a whole other thing too. I feel like that's a little interesting. Like, I don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah. I've never had anybody, I mean, I've had people ask me to do spells, but I've never asked for money.
Right.
I've just done it out of the kindness of my heart, really.
Yeah, because how can you put a price on magic? It's something, I don't know, it's hard to say.
Right. Agreed.
So I think if you're going to do magic spells, I think there's a right way to do them. I think you just need to make sure you're careful.
Right. And wording, for sure.
Yeah.
I definitely believe the wording is really important.
Mm-hmm. And just not being too selfish, I guess.
Right. Right.
Like, I think everyone has times where we're behind on bills, and that can be really stressful. So why not turn to your magic or your craft to help you mentally get through that? And
Right. Right. But if you are having problems, then try meditation.
exactly, right? Yeah. Yeah, and like spells can't just fix all of your problems. That's the truth.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, there may be something else that you need to work on.
Mm-hmm. Like budgeting.
Yeah, exactly. Like maybe you don't need those $300 pair of shoes if you can't pay your rent.
I know. And witchcraft too. Like sometimes books and things that I want are all so expensive.
For sure. That's why it's good to kind of have this group of people to talk to. Like if you know other people who are like-minded,
Mm-hmm.
and then you can talk to them about it. Maybe they have an experience that you don't have and you can learn from each other.
Definitely.
All right. Do we have time for one more, or are we?
Yeah, I think we can do one or two more.
Okay. Let's see here. So, witches and pop culture.
Yay!
Ah,
We already briefly mentioned this.
I know. Yeah. I mean, movies. Come on. There are so many movies, right?
Yeah.
When do you think they started? When did witches in movies start?
In the beginning, witches were probably more seen as a villain, whether it be in like a fairy tale, like Snow White, and even like old black and white movies, there are probably evil witches and things like that. So there's definitely archetypes for witches, I think, in pop culture. It's either you're like the old evil hag who's going to kill someone, or you're a sexy witch kind of thing. Like those are two main popular ways for people to categorize witches.
Right. For sure.
Yeah, so villainizing them or just like making them super sexy.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure Snow White is probably like one of the first times I ever actually saw a witch in a movie. And I remember thinking she's pretty cool, but she's just evil, you know?
That's true. Yeah. She had that magic apple and she used it for bad. That's not how it deserves to be. Can't say that I've ever in person ever met a bad witch.
Yeah, me neither. Because I think if you're going to believe in that kind of stuff, you would believe in like the threefold law of like what you put out there is going to come back to you. And
Right.
aside from like evil witches, I think that there's only a handful of movies and a couple we already mentioned that actually represent what witchcraft is. But yeah, The Craft is definitely one. Even though they're irresponsible teenagers, they're still like doing basic principles of what witchcraft is. So it's pretty interesting to see how they take it.
Right.
They're not the best example of what you should do, but I think
Sure.
they're actually doing like Wicca and things like that.
Right.
Mhm.
The other one that I really like, I don't know if you've ever heard of it. There's this series called the Good Witch series. It started out as movies and now they're doing TV. It's like on the Hallmark Channel or something. She is kind of like a witch that was born a witch. So a lot of things that she knows, it's by intuition and, just using herbs and oils and foods as natural medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really love that concept. And I mean, there are a lot of people who are not witches who still use herbs and oils and food as natural remedies.
Yeah, definitely. That's really cute. I haven't seen that. I think that show might be on Netflix.
Oh, yeah, it is. You're right.
Yeah.
It is.
So it was a movie first?
Yeah, there were a group of movies and then it was a TV show. So I want to say it started in the 90s, but I'm not 100% sure.
Oh, the 90s were a great time for witchy movies.
I know, right? Yeah. Yeah. Because you have to bring up, the three sisters from, oh my gosh.
Are you
I
thinking?
just watched this movie.
I was like, you're not Hocus Pocus, are you?
Yes,
Oh,
Hocus
okay. Yeah.
Pocus. I mean, it's the best, cute little Halloween kid movie.
It is. I have to watch that every Halloween, and obviously it's a silly, take on the whole witchcraft archetype, but it's so fun.
Sure. And it kind of takes it from the old timey, they're bringing in what it was like to be a witch in the old days, which I'm sure is not an accurate interpretation at all, but
Mm-hmm. I like that
It
they
is
do.
definitely funny.
There's still like shades of what witchcraft is. Like she has her book of shadows, and I
Right.
like that they use salt as a ring of protection. And there's like little
Right.
sprinkles of like witchcraft in there that are actual facts, I think.
For sure, like candles and
Yeah.
and spells.
Yeah, I think that one is definitely a movie I watch at least once a year. And I'm not happy that they decided to remake it.
I know. That's going to be interesting how they do a spin on it.
I know. I was like, why don't you just do a sequel? But we'll
Right.
see. We'll see what actually happens.
Right.
And then, like you mentioned earlier, Practical Magic. That is an amazing one.
Yeah. And just the love of sisters and family and,
Mm-hmm.
you know, always having each other's back, because really that's what family is all about. And that's what witches are all about in my mind, is really being there for each other. And
Yeah. Yeah. It is really comforting to think of like all witches like sticking together and having each other's backs, and especially if it's passed down through the family.
yeah, for sure.
That is also a book as well for listeners that don't know. You should definitely go check it out. It's by Alice Hoffman. She has The Practical Magic was the first one, and then the sequel just came out this year. I think it's called The Law of Magic or something.
Right. Yeah. I haven't read that one, but I did read the original Practical Magic. You suggested that to me, and I just loved the story.
I know, it's so good. Like, it explains, like, love and loss growing up and heartache, and it's just so beautiful, and the language is super flowery, and it's my favorite book of all time.
Yeah, it's very good.
Mm-hmm. I think it's on the opposite spectrum of, like, witchy movies I love. There's also witch stereotypes that really aggravate me, and I feel like they just shed us in a horrible light. Like, that movie that came out a couple years ago, I think it was just called Witch. And it was supposed to be so accurate, and I was like, I don't think there's anything accurate about this. I think that people back then were just really fearful of witchcraft, and I don't think there were any evil witches just in the woods killing people.
No, I don't think so. I do not think so.
Yeah. So when I see movies like that as a witch, I totally get offended.
Right. I have to bring up Wizard of Oz because, I mean, that was one of my favorite movies. But if you think of that witch, those witches, there was the good witch and the bad witch.
True.
And I feel like the good witch was basically what good witches are. I mean, all witches today. Yeah. And so then when you think of the wicked witch, she was very malicious.
Yeah, one way of looking at that is like they're just two archetypes, and maybe that's just like one whole of a person. Like that's your shadow self is the Wicked Witch of the West, your darker side, and then your good side is the good witch.
Yeah,
but I really wanted striped black and white socks.
Yes, I actually have a pair.
Me too.
Yeah, and I try to wear them at Halloween.
Yeah, I'm like, but the fashion that is
for sure.
So I think it's hit or miss with witches in pop culture, but there's probably more good than bad.
Right.
Are there any other movie recommendations worth forgetting or to not?
I mean, there are quite a bit of movies. I mean, you can't have to bring up Harry Potter because obviously he wasn't considered to be really a witch, right? Or do you feel that he was? They didn't actually come out in the book and say that he was a witch.
He's a wizard, Harry. That's what they say.
That's right. A wizard.
I feel like that is so odd because I love Harry Potter and I love the occult and witchcraft, and to me they're so separate. Like I don't ever think of one and the same. Like for some reason, anytime I've read the books or even watched the movies, I don't think about witchcraft at all. I guess it's because her writing isn't really based on what magic is, aside from the fact that they do use brooms and wands and spells. But it's such a different take on it. Like, I just look at it as a cool world she built, and it's really cool fiction, but not really based on any kind of magic, I guess.
Right. That makes sense. So I think my other one, I think maybe I just really like kids' movies or something because there was this series called Halloween Town. Do you remember that one?
Yes!
Halloween Town was the greatest. And I love that they brought up the fact that she couldn't get her powers until she was, 13 or something. So it was her special birthday, and that meant that she was going to get her powers, and 13 is a representation of something. I'm sure, I just don't know what it is off the top of my head.
You know, it's weird. In witchcraft, 13 is a lucky number, and so Friday the 13th is considered a witch's luckiest day of the year, and it's like, for most people, everyone's really scared of that day. And I think it's just another time where, like, society at one point in time turned against witches and just deemed them to be evil. So a lot of the things that witches were using to their benefit, like, society started thinking were negative.
Right.
So Friday the 13th is not unlucky, it's very lucky.
That's funny, because I remember everybody always saying that they felt it was a horrible day, and I just instinctively was like, no, I love it. It's a time for me to wear black and walk under ladders, because I know nothing bad can happen to me today.
Right? That's so good. You intuitively were like, nah, I'm not going to believe it. I'm going to smash this mirror and go on my day.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Halloween Town still has, like, a big following. Like, I read last year, the year before, that the actors and all of them even met on and did some sort of reunion in front of, like, the giant pumpkin and things like that.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I read that too.
Yeah, there is a big Halloween Town following.
Such a cute little set of movies.
Yeah, they really are. I guess Disney has done a lot for witchcraft.
That's true.
'Cause, like,
maybe they're trying to tell us something.
Right? Like, all of their cartoons were heavily based on old stories, like with Merlin and any of the fairy tales. Like, even the fairy godmothers, I feel like they're very witchy in the way that they help out.
Even Little Mermaid, if you think about Ursula, she was a type of a witch.
She was. Oh, she was definitely an evil witch.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think in Disney there are witches for evil for the most part. Because if you think about the Enchantress from Beauty and the Beast.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, she's just very rude.
She wasn't completely evil. She was just trying to teach him a lesson.
Right, but who is she to stick her business?
Yeah, that's true.
Right?
It just felt he needed it.
Yeah, I guess it worked out in the end. Maybe it was better overall.
Right.
I don't know. You think we have time for one more?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure, let's see what we have. Moving on spells.
Ooh.
I don't really know a whole lot about these. I have to say that I have done one once. It was basically, I wanted to let go of an old habit, and so I did this spell. But when I say spell, I don't do it in the traditional way. I don't typically set out an altar or anything like that. I just write some words down and I say it. Sometimes I don't even write it. Sometimes I just say it. So it's basically, I'm asking the universe in my mind, could you help me move on from this situation?
That's so much simpler, but it seems like it's really effective for you. Like, do you think that's tapping into the law of attraction, or?
It might be. I just know that it works for me.
Yeah.
So I keep doing it.
Yeah. I'm very much like the opposite, where, like, I'll do an altar, I just cast a circle, I'll, like, call the elements and the gods. A moving on spell I had done once was to try to forgive someone that, like, just kind of wronged me in the past in a way that I just harbored a lot of resentment towards them. And I knew that it wasn't really healthy for me to carry that on anymore.
Sure.
And so I was working on just trying to let it go. And when I'm doing spell work, I'll really go internal and I just kind of focus inward and I'll try to process through my emotions and just work through it. I think I was just like at the point where I had been focusing on forgiving them, just, you know, shedding light and love and not hatred and just like washing it all out of me. And I had like a little mini cauldron that I was burning in my house. And I had it on top of like a pentacle, and it was like a pentagram pentacle, and it was glass. And the weird thing about the situation was I had my hands around the flame in the cauldron, and as soon as I was like, my energy hit a peak, and I was like, oh, I think I've moved on, I've let it all go. I heard a crack, and the pentacle under the glass had cracked from just the heat was so intense. But the time was so perfect, it felt like my forgiveness had like cracked it and the spell worked, and I took it as a big sign.
Sure, I would have too.
Yeah, I was sad that I broke my pentacle, though. It was very pretty.
I'm sure.
And I
Yeah.
actually buried it in the woods somewhere like a witch. I was just like, you're going into the earth. So I was,
I totally love that.
yeah, like a creepy hag digging a hole and hoping no one would find me because I don't have a backyard. So I think moving on spells can be applied to a lot of different things, but they're powerful.
Agreed.
Yeah, I'm sure you could use it for moving on from any negative situation or a relationship, like you said, a habit.
Yeah, or even a job. I think you could request to move on from that job and go somewhere else.
That's true. That is a great thing, because I think at one point in time, everyone's going to have just a buildup of something they need to let go.
Right.
So I'm thinking we could probably move on to our main topic for today.
Yes. So today we are talking about ancient aliens. We are going to touch on the subject of ancient astronauts, talk about a couple of Nazca Lines and some paintings, and we're going to talk about this very interesting subject of a 1561 battle over Nuremberg, Germany. And let's see what else. When we initially were talking about this subject, and correct me if I'm wrong, we were like, okay, I want to talk about ancient astronauts. This is what we're going to talk about. But when I started doing some digging, because we were watching the show Ancient Aliens, and I'm not saying it's a bad show because I still watch it religiously, but I feel like we should always fact check, because just because you like a show does not mean that they're going to say accurate information. So a couple of the things that we really wanted to talk about, we don't get to talk about today because they were debunked. And
yeah,
crazy. A little bit sad about that.
It is true, because the show Ancient Aliens is presented in such a way that you're just like, oh, this is mind-blowing. Why isn't everyone talking about this? And you go Google something and you realize, oh, because it's completely not true.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
I think the one that you found about the carving of the astronaut was really ridiculous, that they would try to pass that off as true information. If you want to describe that a little bit.
Yeah, so I don't remember what episode, but in Ancient Aliens, they're constantly showing this old carving from a church somewhere in South America. And it's this cute little astronaut. And if you look at it, you're like, oh my gosh, it's on this church that was built in 1100. How can that possibly be? Mm-hmm. And so then I was looking at it. They were restoring the church in the 1990s, like somewhere in the mid 90s.
Yeah.
And when someone restores a project, apparently they get to add a little of their own flair into it. So this guy chose to put in, or this artist, I should say, he chose to add in a picture of a gargoyle eating a ice cream cone, and then this little astronaut. And I was so disappointed, though. I was like, man, I so believe in aliens. Why couldn't this be real?
I know. And I think the Wikipedia page had that picture up as the ancient astronaut theorist page. Like if you click on it, you'll see that little carving, and it's like, that is your whole basis of truth. It's a lie.
Yeah, it's a lie. I was really sad to find that out.
So a lot of it is just like different theories that we've looked into, and we're kind of just putting our own thoughts on it. But a lot of them are really fun, and it is interesting to look back and think, like, what if, Right,
exactly. I mean, what could it possibly be?
Mm-hmm. Some of the things that I like to look at, but I really think it's up to interpretation, is artwork. Like when they'll show you cave paintings and they try to tell you it's an alien, there's times where you're like, I don't know, that's just a guy with a big head. And then there's other ones where it legitimately looks just like an alien and a UFO over everything. Right. And then
how could you think that it wasn't that?
Yeah, exactly. And then like for religious paintings too, there's so many religious paintings where there'll be like Jesus on the crucifix, and then to the left and to the right of him you see like a dude in like a weird little sphere, and they're trying to say that that's like a man in a flying saucer. And that one's not as clear, but I think that's up to interpretation. Like, what else could it be? I don't know.
Right.
I'm not an artist.
Why else would a guy be flying in the sky in what looks like a little ship?
Yes. And then through researching for this episode, I found a painting. It was called the Baptism, I think, of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
It's like an 18th century painting. And if you just Google it, maybe it was in 1701, actually. If you Google it, though, you'll see the picture, and he's being baptized, and there's like a light coming down from the sky. And what kids do not looks like a perfect circular UFO.
Right. With a little opening in the center of it that you can see too, that they've put in there. And I think you're right. It was like 1710.
Yeah, and like I don't know what if they're trying to say. Are they trying to say that's a light from the heavens? But like, why is there a perfect silver circle? It looks just like a UFO.
Right, right. And hopefully, I think we're going to talk about that another time about possibility of there being aircraft in the Bible and from that time period. So we can kind of talk then about what I believe are probably aliens that are in the Bible.
Definitely, because the Bible is a far out there book. It has some crazy concepts, and
Right.
I think that it's very fair to insert outside influences and maybe like beings with higher technology into the situations.
Sure. Whether you want to call them angels or aliens, they may be the same thing. We really don't know.
True. True. And then there's a lot of just like places all over the world that have just like highly intelligently designed things, whether it be like the pyramids or Stonehenge. And one that kept popping up during my research was the Nazca Lines. And
Oh, yeah.
I wasn't really familiar with that beforehand, but now that I've looked into it, like if you Google Nazca Lines, you'll see that it's just like these giant carvings into the dirt, and they're really well made. There's one of like a monkey, there's a spider, there's one that's been nicknamed the astronaut because he has like a bubbly head and two big eyes. And they're just really large, and it's like you wouldn't really be able to see them unless you were in the sky. And so that's where like the ancient alien theory comes in, that they must have been created by someone in a flying saucer type situation, like who could only create them from above, because how could someone on the ground create them?
Sure. Or maybe they were instructed to do so.
They're just kind of like doing it for the gods or for the aliens.
Mm-hmm.
But when I looked into it more, the Nazca people at the time who lived there were really religious and into doing these rituals. And I think they were associated with like the cult of the dead. And so if you kind of go off with that whole thing, it kind of seems like they might have made those lines themselves. They were just really religious, and certain lines that were there, they'll line up with like the sun on the summer solstice or the winter solstice. So it might not even really be like an alien thing so much as it was like a religious thing back then.
Do you think it had anything to do with so that they could, maybe the sun hit it in a certain way so that they knew when to pull crops, or?
Maybe, because I mean, it was such a deserty place. I'm not sure what they grew in the region.
That's true.
They were really famous apparently for their pottery back then, and they were known as to be really spiritual and sacred. And so people from all over would travel to Nazca and buy those pots, and like they would almost be like souvenirs at the time and take them out with them. And also a fun thing about the people who were doing like rituals there, they had all these underground tunnels, and they would drink the San Pedro cactus juice, which is like a hallucinogenic. And so they would be like doing really weird stuff. They would do decapitations and keep like skulls on altars and tripping on cactus juice.
Wow. Oh my goodness. It's like an old form of acid.
Definitely. So I feel like these people were on just another spiritual level of some sorts, and they had like shamanism there and things like that. And like the carving of the monkey, he has his tail is like in a spiral, which is like a really known shape. It's like known as the cosmic circle that you can be found throughout like the ancient world, and it dates around to like the Neolithic period. So you can see like spirals in cave drawings and all over the world, which is kind of interesting because it's like, how did all these different cultures end up doing spirals? So that was
right.
one
Yeah,
thing.
that's crazy. I mean, the continents were spread out during that time. It's not like we were in Pangea. So, I mean, if everything was spread out, how did they get knowledge back and forth to each other? I mean, did they go on boats? No, I don't think so.
Yeah, there really was no way to communicate. So that ancient symbol, they kind of, I think with ancient astronauts, they try to say that is tied to the universal spiral, like a spiral of a galaxy.
Sure.
Maybe aliens were involved in creating that monkey.
Gotcha.
And like,
That makes sense.
yeah, and another theory is that like the different shapes, they're tied to like a constellation. So like the monkey, there is a monkey constellation, and I think he had like 16 stars in his constellations. And if you count the digits on the monkey, he had like, I think it was 4 toes on each foot, and then he had 5 fingers on one hand and like 4 on the other. And so they're trying to say, oh, that adds up to the amount of numbers that are in that constellation. So these people probably just had a really good view of the stars at the time, and they were lining up their lines with the sun and the solstices. They're lining up these shapes with the constellations. It's just really impressive.
That is very impressive. Like, how would they have done that from the ground?
Yeah. The one that I find to be the most symmetrical was the spider one. I don't know if you Googled that, but like
I've seen pictures of that one.
Yes,
yeah.
The legs are so perfect.
Yeah.
I don't, it's kind of hard to imagine that you could do that.
Right. Like, did they draw it on paper first? Yeah.
The weird thing about the lines, like, the only reason that they haven't, like, I guess the way you create them is you can just take, like, a stick of some sorts and just literally trace on the dirt. And they show, because there's a reddish pebbles on the ground, and when you carve it out, it's going to show, like, the whitish gray ground that's underneath it. And so, in my opinion, it's very delicate, and they say that the only reason that these lines have been preserved for so long is because it rains for, like, 15 minutes in a year there. There's no wind and, like, no human activity. So these lines have just survived that long because of the conditions are just so different there.
So dry. I can't even imagine 15 minutes of water a year.
Yeah. I know. If those lines were anywhere else, they would have been washed away and, like, you would not see them.
Yeah. We wouldn't know they existed.
And I actually did find out that this year there were 50 new Nazca Lines that were discovered because they had these drones that went out and they were doing like 3D scanning, and they were actually predated the Nazca people by 1,000 years. Wow.
So I wonder who would have done that if it wasn't the Nazca people?
I forget. It was like the Torpus and the people, I'm mispronouncing it, but there was another civilization that lived there before them, and they were drawing stuff that was similar, but there were more warriors. There was like a warrior that had decapitated someone, and there were plants and animal drawings. It's pretty interesting because I don't really think that it was necessarily aliens. It sounds like it was more just the people who lived there.
And so were they huge drawings like the Nazca Lines are, or were they smaller?
They were about the same size, and they would even draw these ones on the sides of cliffs so that if you were standing on the ground, you could look up at the side of the cliff and see a warrior decapitating someone.
Oh my gosh.
It's a clear message.
Yeah. If you come over here, this is what's going to happen to you.
Yeah. So I wonder if like the Nazca people saw that and just added to it.
Oh, maybe.
But it's a really cool tradition. It's cool to see how creative people can be. And so that's why with that was another one that once you dig into it, it's kind of hard to think that it's just aliens, you know?
Right. I mean, it's all of these old things. It's really difficult to determine what was really going on because we weren't actually there. So we're just basing everything on anything that may have been written at the time, along with our scientific brain, really.
I think the other theory that I forgot to mention was that the ones that are just like straight up lines and not artwork, they like to say those are runways for aliens.
Oh, that's interesting. Or maybe it could have been like an old road, or I mean, it didn't necessarily have to be.
That's true, actually. That reminded me because the Nazca people, they had like all these different tribes that they were like camping in between the lines back then, apparently. So some people are like, I think that those were just pathways between different colonies.
Oh, that would make sense.
Yeah, it makes so much more sense than digging alien runway.
Maybe they were like, okay, if you're on this side of the line, you're okay. But if you're on that side of the line, that's where you go to the bathroom.
Yes. Or it's like the sharks and the jets and they would battle.
Right. Red Rover.
Yeah. So I don't know. I feel like artwork, it's just kind of up to interpretation of whoever's looking at it. There's not a lot of facts there. But one thing that we both did end up coming across was this written article from 1561, and it's titled The Battle over Nuremberg Germany. And I think this is a little more interesting because it is like a first-hand written account of seeing things flying in the sky. So it's not as much of a stretch as, say, like artwork or Nazca Lines and things like that.
Right.
It was written by this guy, Hans Glasser, and this event was said to take place at dawn, and it was described as a war in the heavens. And there was a wide variety of crafts, ranging from spheres to spear-like cylinders to crosses, and they said plates. And the sky was apparently filled with the machines clashing in battle for hours, which is pretty crazy to me. And it was evident to the people who were watching that one side ended up winning, which is interesting. I don't know how they could tell the sides really apart, but in the end, there were spheroid UFOs, and they were seen emerging from a huge cylindrical mothership that was black, which I'm kind of curious to know what the mothership was. I'm imagining it was just really huge.
Right. Ginormous.
Right? Yeah, that sounds super cool. And then the incident, at the time, they were thinking it was something to do with God, and like God was punishing them. And
right.
They didn't really think aliens, it all comes back to religion. But something flying in the sky like that, and they also would describe that when they were battling and one would crash down, they would see all this smoke billowing up. So it's definitely machines.
Right. Yeah, because they did say that they crashed to the ground. Mm-hmm. And what I thought was really interesting is they drew a picture of what they saw.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, I mean, if anybody wants to Google it, just 1561 battle over Nuremberg, Germany, and this article will pop up. And so back at the time, didn't we find out that it was a carving? It was done in wood.
Yes.
The actual picture. Yeah.
And it looks really weird. Like, it's not like a typical UFO, but it just shows like the sun, and then there's like these dots, and then just like almost little mini poles.
Right.
So it's not at all what we think is a typical flying craft, but the description to me is definitely flying crafts.
Right, exactly. And so, you know, in reading this, I discovered that there was this book that was written by Carl Jung in 1958 called Flying Saucers, A Modern Myth of Things Seen in the Skies. And in that book, he tore apart this Nuremberg Germany thing, and he said, well, you know what I think it is? It was a sundog. That's what they were saying. Okay, so a sundog is basically, and I've actually posted a picture of one that I witnessed in my own backyard. I posted that on our page. It's basically an ice formation that kind of goes around the sun, and it's just a reflection of light on the ice. And so it doesn't really move. It's there for a while and then it goes away. It just disappears. It doesn't crash to the ground. It doesn't cause noise.
Yeah.
You know,
battle at all.
Yeah. It doesn't sound like a battle at all. It's very pretty.
Yeah.
But it is definitely not like what was described in the article. So for him to come out and say that, and then everybody after that believed whatever he said because he was this great whatever. I don't know if he was a scientist. I really don't know who he is. I should know who he is because his name is really familiar to me, but
definitely someone who comes up in the spiritualism community. Like, I think he's the one who came up with that whole concept of like your shadow self.
Oh, right. Because he was a psychiatrist. Mm-hmm. That's right.
Mm-hmm. But sundog it was not.
Right. Yeah. So they just believed him. And then they were like, okay, well, this has been debunked. But that sounds nothing to me like what he was talking about. Mm-hmm. So in my mind, I was like, okay, here it is. I'm going to say it. What if? What if it was something else? So to me, when they were describing, and the only reason why I'm going to say this is because I saw something similar outside it after I had read this article. I went outside and I was looking up at the sky and a plane went over and it was red. And I was like, hey, you know what? That looks like a cross. Mm-hmm. Hey, you know what? That looks exactly like the cross from the picture that they showed on the article for the Nuremberg Germany. I'm like, well, why would they be seeing that? Planes didn't exist in 1561. How could they have seen that? So I was thinking, well, what if it was not UFOs, but what if it was some form of time travel?
Right.
So I was like, I mean, I know we don't think of time travel as actually existing right now, but they are doing tests on it. It's not that we're not that far away from actually having it happen. So if you believe in the theory, hopefully I don't get this wrong because I'm not a scientist, so please do not quote me on everything that I'm saying. This is just my theory. If you believe that vibration and time exists all at once, because time is just basically vibration. So if you believe that it exists all at once, what if we either traveled or there was an imprint of something that happened during that time? So in 1945, there was a battle in Germany that occurred. And at that time period, I mean, I hate to bring up Hitler, but during that time, he was toying with time travel. So what if what if he was successful? So what if he was successful and he sent craft there without realizing it? Maybe they were just doing a test. And that's what was being seen. The Americans and the Germans fighting over each other, fighting against each other over Germany. So,
right. Like if there was a way to somehow transport a group of fighting jets from one time to another, and if it was by mistake.
Right.
Like
right.
people back in Nuremberg, in Germany back then would not know what those things were.
Exactly. And if they crashed, I mean, it said that they killed each other. They had crashed to the ground, right? Mm-hmm. So if that occurred, then they would be lost here. In 1945, in that time period, they would have been lost. So I was trying to find successful instances in 1945 in Nuremberg, Germany, that maybe some aircraft went missing. I was not successful. But what I did find was pictures of aircraft that they had at that time. And it was uncanny how some of the craft that they have, craft that I've never seen to this day that I know that we don't use. I was like, wait a second, where did this craft come from? So if that was made, I mean, they had almost what looked like tubular type craft. They had all sorts of different types. So imagine seeing that in 1561 and thinking, what could this be? And I don't speak German, otherwise I would say it right now. What could this be? What could this possibly be? And so I also started thinking, if time kind of all exists at once, then I came across this picture of this giant black craft that China has now made. They used to fly it around, but now it's considered to be a drone. But it is this huge, massive black craft. And so I thought it looked exactly like this thing in this picture that the guy drew in 1561, this Mr. Glaser guy. So how could this dark sword fighter drone from China in today's time period be back there? But it looks exactly like that picture.
Yeah, it does. And it's really weird because, I mean, there's that theory that, like, all time is going on simultaneously. And,
right.
like, time is just an illusion. And it's just, like, it's not, like, really linear.
Right.
So I think that it could make sense, like, if, as a theory, that somehow they were just, like, overlapping.
Right. Somehow they were overlapping. Or if you want to bring in some sort of ghost theory that, I mean, I don't want to bring in a ghost theory as far as, but I already said it. But the thing is that, I mean, in a ghost theory, you wouldn't have planes crashing and then it wouldn't have remnants of craft on the ground in a ghost theory.
That's like the one thing. Yeah, that kind of bothers me about the article is they don't mention anyone going to these sites where the smoke was emitting from.
Right. But
could you have done a follow-up article?
Right. But we don't know. I mean, there's a possibility that there was an article somewhere else. We're just not at that point where we can research that, or maybe they didn't have. I mean, there could have been other articles, but they've been lost over time.
Yeah. Right, because, I mean, like, you would think going to the source of whatever landed would really answer questions, because other people were trying to say that it could just be, like, a weird celestial event or meteors.
Right.
But, like, meteors and a battle are very different things.
For sure. So I did find something that I felt was kind of interesting. So aside from the fact that there was fighting going on in 1945 around April 14th. Mind you, this all happened, this sighting that they saw was April 14th, 1561. April 18th, 1945 was when where there was a huge battle in Nuremberg, Germany with the Germans and the Americans and Russians. And then I'm really going to go out there and just throw all these things out that happened during April 14th. So Lincoln was assassinated on April 14th, 1865. Mm-hmm. The Titanic happened April 14th, 1912. There was a huge explosion in India, April 14th, 1945, and it killed thousands of people. Mount Vesuvius erupted and killed like 6,000 people, April 14th, 1906. So you can't tell me that there's not some sort of significance with that date.
That is really creepy. So that is way worse than Friday the 13th, people. 4/14 is the day to stay home.
That's right. So if you don't have surgery, don't go driving.
Yeah.
Just stay home. Just stay home. Read a good book. Watch some TV.
Yeah. I think that is really interesting to see the correlation of numbers there. 4/14 in history. And I'm sure that was just like probably a quick search, so we could probably find more.
I'm sure that there are more, but I was just like, wait a second, why did all this stuff happen on the same day? And so that's why I was thinking of thinking if it were ghosts or some sort of apparition happening just sort of on repeat, that negative day, that was just a negative day and bad things were happening.
I mean, I think it's definitely a valid theory.
Yeah.
Because something went down that day that is pretty unexplained. And it's like too bad. If only we could see it now, we could probably bring so much clarity to the situation with modern technology. But back then, they had no idea about what they were looking at. Right.
They were just like, oh my goodness, I slept with my neighbor and God is punishing me.
Yeah. God knows what I did.
One little boy was running around and he was like, oh man, I shouldn't have stole that strawberry.
Exactly. Y'all need to go repent for your sins. That's pretty much how the article ends, I think.
Right. Yeah, it was just saying repent. Mm-hmm. We've done horrible things.
No matter what it was, it is still first ever UFO recorded incident, I think, in history.
Right.
So that makes it really significant.
Yeah, for sure. Very interesting.
So today's findings may have not led us to find significant proof of aliens, but we have found other theories thanks to the Wendy's What If.
And we will find more. We will find more eventually someday.
Yeah, definitely. That is a good time to wrap up our show. Did you have any final thoughts on that theory?
I don't. I feel pretty talked out about that.
Awesome.
Join us next week when we talk about cleansing your house and cleansing yourself. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and all of that good stuff. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Mixcloud. Send us any questions or comments to cousinscoven2@gmail.com. And we just have to say, may you find happiness in your heart, love for yourself, and joy in each other. Blessings to all.
I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
Are you a good witch or a bad witch?